Her parents said she was too big, too slow, and too much of a burden. So one afternoon they put her in the back of an old truck and sold her to a poor farmer to erase their debts. They said she was a burden, too big, too slow, and too useless to be loved by anyone. And then, on a dusty afternoon, they placed her in the back of an old truck and sold her to a man she had never met, just to wipe away the family's debt. Dust billowed behind the worn brown Ford as it rumbled along a long dirt road leading to a small farm in the middle of Kansas. On the passenger seat sat Evelyn Carter, a 22-year-old woman, silent and still. Her hands clutched tightly at a faded fraying suitcase, the only thing she was allowed to bring. Her pale blonde hair was neatly braided. Her blue eyes, heavy with sadness, stared out through the dust-streaked window. The wind tugged at the hem of her simple floral dress, a dress mended many times over, as the hot, dry air pressed against the glass. No one spoke. Her father drove with a face hard as wood. The silence between them weighed heavily than any words of blame could. Before they left home, he had told her, in that dry, bitter tone of his, "Daniel Whitaker is a poor farmer, but at least he needs a wife. He'll pay off the stored debt. You should be grateful. For once in your life, you're doing something helpful for this family." Evelyn didn't reply. Inside her, a numbness spread through every breath. She had no tears left to cry, because over the years she had cried them all out. Since childhood, she had always been different. Bigger, quieter, lonelier than the other children. Her mother hid her shame behind gentle reminders. "Walk lightly, dear. People are watching." But her father hid nothing. He said it plainly, even in front of others. "That girl will never find a husband. All she does is eat. She's useless to anyone." Back then, Evelyn would only force a small, awkward smile. She had grown used to being treated like a mistake that needed to be hidden. And today, as the truck turned onto the red clay road leading toward a small wooden house in the middle of the wheat fields, she knew that mistake had now become a commodity to be traded. The truck came to a stop. Dust drifted through the air, settling on her shoulders. Henry Carter, her father, didn't meet her eyes. He only muttered, "Get out. From now on you belong to him. Don't shame my family." Evelyn opened the door and stepped down. Her shoes met the cracked, dry earth. A gust of wind brushed against her face, tossing a strand of hair across her cheek. For a brief moment she felt so small beneath the vast, overwhelming Kansas sky. From behind the house a man appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-browned skin and eyes as warm and deep as the soil itself. He strolled, removed his cowboy hat, and gave a gentle nod. "Hello, ma'am. I'm Daniel Whitaker. This is my father, Mr. George." Evelyn bowed her head slightly, not daring to look straight at him. But when he spoke, his voice calm, steady, and free of any hint of contempt, her heart trembled softly. "I know this isn't easy for you. But please know, Evelyn, you'll be treated with respect here, and you'll be safe. This is your home, if you choose to stay." Those were words Evelyn had never heard before. No orders, no scolding, only kindness, so genuine it left her speechless. Behind her, the truck engine started again. Her father never looked back. The vehicle drove away, disappearing into a cloud of fading dust. leaving the young woman standing alone in the open yard, her hands still gripping the old suitcase, her heart heavy. But for the first time, a faint light flickered quietly inside her chest. As her father's truck disappeared down the dirt road, the dust still lingered in the air. Evelyn stood motionless, listening to the wind sweeping through the golden wheat fields. The only sound came from somewhere nearby, the faint creak of a wooden gate swaying gently in the breeze. The man named Daniel Whitaker walked toward her slowly, as if afraid of frightening her further. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he slipped off his gloves, bent down, lifted the heavy suitcase from her trembling hands, and offered a soft smile. "Let me help you. The house is old, but my father and I do our best to keep it warm." She only nodded, her voice trembling. Thank you." A simple phrase, yet it was the first time in years she had been met with a look free of judgment. When she stepped inside, Evelyn froze. The house wasn't luxurious, but it carried a strange kind of warmth. Golden light streamed through the window frames and spread softly across the polished wooden floor. In the corner, a wood stove still glowed with embers, and the faint smell of freshly baked bread lingered in the air. On the table stood a vase of wildflowers, bright yellow, likely picked from the very field outside. From the kitchen, an older man emerged, gray hair, gentle eyes. It was Mr. George, Daniel's father. He looked at her with a kind smile and spoke in a low, rough but warm voice. "Welcome, Evelyn. You must be tired from the long road. There's not much here, but you'll always have a hot meal and a safe bed." She almost burst into tears. It had been so long since anyone had called her dear with such tenderness. No scorn, no demand, just care. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say." Mr. George simply smiled and waved his hand. "No need to say anything. Around here, we do more than we talk." Daniel opened the door to a small room at the end of the hallway. The window faced the open fields. A clean white blanket covered the bed. Beside it stood a small wooden table and a jar of wild daisies. He spoke softly, avoiding her eyes. "This will be your room. The door locks. Here's the key. I think you'll need time to adjust. And please know, no one here will ever make you afraid." His words made her heart tighten. No one had ever told her before that she had the right to feel safe in her own life. Evelyn sat down on the edge of the bed, resting her hands on the soft blanket as warmth spread through her fingertips. From the window, she saw Daniel crossing the yard, pausing to pick up his father's fallen hat and carefully hanging it back on the hook. Just a small act, but filled with quiet thoughtfulness. That man, the one her father had called a poor farmer, seemed to possess another kind of wealth: kindness. That evening, the three of them sat around a large wooden table. Dinner was simple but comforting: beef stew, mashed potatoes, and golden cornbread. Daniel asked gently, "Do you like reading, Evelyn?" She looked surprised. "I do, but it's been a long time since I've touched a book." His eyes lit up, and a small smile broke across his face, a smile that eased the silence between them. "Good. There's an old bookshelf in the living room. It belonged to my mother. In the morning you can pick any book you'd like." Mr. George chimed in, his raspy voice carrying a playful tone. "My son means well, but we have one rule here. Whoever finishes a book has to tell us what they learned from it. That's how we talk around here." They all laughed, a simple, genuine sound that made Evelyn feel something inside her melt. That night, back in her room, she opened the window. The wind carried the scent of hay and earth. Moonlight draped the wheat fields like a silver blanket. In that faint glow, she saw Daniel's silhouette in the yard, turning off the lights in the barn, strolling, tall, steady. For the first time in her life, Evelyn didn't feel imprisoned. She felt as if she were standing at the edge of a beginning. She whispered to herself, "Maybe not every place is as cold as the one I came from. Maybe, somewhere out there, people can still be kind." The first days on the farm passed slowly, but strangely enough, not heavily. Each morning, Evelyn woke to the smell of toasted bread and coffee drifting through the wooden kitchen. Mr. George was usually up early, reading the newspaper by the window. Daniel was often already outside, sometimes gone long before dawn, driving his small truck loaded with hay. She gradually adjusted to the rhythm of life there, a place where no one shouted, no one compared, and no one looked at her with pity. One afternoon, Evelyn carried a tray of tea out to the porch. From there, she could see the long fences stretching all the way to the horizon. In the distance, herds of cattle grazed peacefully under the golden sunset. She was taken aback. This farm seemed far larger than what her father had ever described. The next day, Daniel invited her to take a little tour. He drove the truck across vast wheat fields glowing in sunlight, the land stretching endlessly. They stopped near a small irrigation ditch where several workers were inspecting a water pump. They greeted Daniel as Mr. Whitaker, their tone filled with respect. Evelyn glanced at him and asked softly, "Do you hire all of them?" Daniel smiled. "They work with me. Everyone here gets a share of the harvest. I just take care of the more complex parts." His answer left her silent for a while. There was something about this man, something entirely different from the image she once had of a poor farmer. That evening, as they sat together at the wooden table, the warm light fell across the open pages of the ledger Evelyn was helping him record. She suddenly asked, "Daniel, may I ask, why didn't you tell my father the truth about this farm and about who you really are?" He set his pen down and looked at her calmly. "Because your father wasn't really looking for a husband for you, Evelyn. He was looking for someone to buy his silence. If I had told him I wasn't poor, it would have turned into another transaction, and you would have become a more expensive commodity." His tone carried no resentment, only the quiet steadiness of wind moving through a field. Evelyn lowered her head. Her heart ached, not out of shame, but because she realized that in this world, there were still people who understood the worth of dignity. After a long pause, she whispered, "Then why did you still agree?" Daniel lifted his gaze, meeting her eyes. "Because I heard you were a kind woman, just someone who had never been treated right. And I thought, maybe we both need each other. You need a place to start over, and I need someone to make this house feel less empty." Evelyn couldn't help but smile softly. It had been so long since anyone spoke to her with such respect. It's been so long since anyone believed she could bring something good into someone's life. That night, stepping out onto the porch, she gazed at the moonlit fields. The wind brushed through her hair. The scent of earth and ripened wheat calmed her soul. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt she belonged somewhere. He didn't just save me from a debt, she thought. He's teaching me how to believe in kindness again. Autumn drifted gently across the fields of Kansas. The sunlight had softened. The breeze carried the scent of ripe wheat and the dampness of soil after rain. Evelyn was different now. Her figure still round and full, but her steps were steady, and her eyes gleamed with a new kind of confidence. She was no longer the timid girl in the old floral dress. Now, every morning she went out to the fields with Daniel, keeping records, managing the harvest and purchases. The numbers that once gave Daniel a headache were now neatly organized under Evelyn's careful hands. He often joked, "Without you, I'd probably mix up the cows with the invoices." Evelyn laughed, a gentle, genuine laugh full of quiet confidence, the kind of smile Daniel always noticed, though he never said it aloud. In the afternoons, she often cooked with Mr. George. He told stories of the old days, his deep, warm voice like an old song that never faded. Once, when Evelyn accidentally spilled a pot of soup, she panicked and apologized, but Mr. George just chuckled, resting a kind hand on her shoulder. "It's all right, my dear. You've brought more to this home than any meal ever could. You've brought laughter." Those words silenced her for a moment. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had said something kind to her. Perhaps that was all she'd ever needed, to be treated as someone who mattered. Day by day, Evelyn began to change for real. She spoke more, smiled easier, even teased Daniel sometimes as he bent over fixing the water pump. "A rich farmer still has to fix things himself?" He looked up, a faint grin tugging at his lips. "No matter how rich a man is, without someone good by his side, it's all just empty." His words made her heart tremble softly. It wasn't pity. It was respect. Partnership. In the evenings, they often sat in the living room reading together. Daniel read slowly, his voice deep and calm. Evelyn would tilt her head slightly, listening as if each word were a breath of peace. One night she happened to catch her reflection in the mirror. It was still her, but somehow different. Not because her body had changed, but because her eyes now carried certainty. "Maybe," she whispered, "I was never meant to shrink to fit the world. Maybe I just needed to believe I was already enough." Daniel heard her and smiled faintly. He said nothing, only closed his book, walked to the window and gazed out at the fields under the moonlight. The silver glow spread across the endless land, the kind of wealth he never flaunted, never used to make anyone feel small. For him, humility was the only true richness. That night, Evelyn sat quietly by the fireplace, feeling something within her awaken, as if she was being reborn. No makeup, no new dress, and yet she felt beautiful. A quiet beauty, born of dignity and kindness. Once, they sold her as a debt, but now she had found herself as a gift. Winter came gently, as if the wind itself was afraid to disturb the fragile peace that had just begun to bloom on that little farm. Snow blanketed the rooftops in white. Thin trails of smoke curled upward, melting softly into the pale gray sky. Inside the small room by the fireplace, Daniel and Evelyn sat together, each with a book in hand, the flickering firelight reflecting in their eyes. The wind howled outside, rattling the window pane, yet inside, everything was achingly warm. Daniel closed his book and sat quietly for a long moment. The firelight danced across his face, calm, yet shadowed with the weight of something unspoken. He turned to her, his voice roughened with hesitation. "Evelyn, there's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time, but I kept holding back." She looked up, her clear blue eyes shimmering in the glow of the fire. "What is it, Daniel?" He drew a deep breath, placing his book gently on the table. "When this all began, I thought it was just an arrangement, the way for both of us to get past our losses. I never expected anything more than that." She stayed silent. Memories flickered through her mind. Her father's scolding voice, her mother's look of shame, the humiliation of being sold off. She feared what might come next, the same kind of words she'd heard all her life. But Daniel continued, slowly, clearly, his voice filled with emotion. But as the days went by, I realized something. I began waiting to hear your laughter. I noticed how you brought this house back to life, not with money, but with kindness and light. And I realized, I've fallen in love with you, Evelyn. The room fell silent. Only the soft crackling of firewood filled the air. She stared at him, stunned, tears welling in her eyes, unable to speak. Love me? But you know who I am. Daniel smiled gently, stepping closer, his voice deep and sure. I do know. I know you've been hurt, called a burden, even sold off like a debt. But to me, you are the gift that life sent my way. You haven't just made this place warmer, Evelyn. You've made me better. Evelyn broke down, tears falling, not from shame this time, but from release. For the first time in her life, someone saw her, not through her weight, not through her past, but through her heart. She took his hand, her voice trembling yet filled with truth. Daniel, you don't have to pity me. I know I'm not like others. He shook his head softly. No, Evelyn. This isn't pity. This is a choice. And of all the things I've ever gained, you are the one I know I'll never lose. The firelight painted their faces, two souls once lonely, once broken, now finding each other in the quietest, most peaceful moment of their lives. I used to think I was a burden, she whispered, tears tracing her cheeks. But you've made me realize I can be someone's reason to smile. Daniel's reply melted into the sound of the crackling fire. Not just a reason, Evelyn. You are home. Spring came late that year. The snow melted slowly, yet the young sprouts still pushed bravely through the warming soil. And it was in that very spring that Evelyn and Daniel held a small ceremony, right there on the wheat field. No lavish wedding dress, no grand guests, only Mr. George, a few close neighbors, and the gentle breeze rustling through the young stalks of wheat. When Daniel took Evelyn's hand, his eyes shone as bright as the morning sun. This time, he said softly, we're not beginning out of debt or arrangement. We're beginning out of love. She smiled, the smile she once thought she would never be able to wear again. The old wounds were still there, but they no longer hurt. They had simply become witnesses, marks of a journey back to herself. From that day on, the Whitaker farm was never the same. Evelyn was no longer the wife who was chosen. She became a true partner, a manager, a woman who knew her voice deserved to be heard. She worked beside her husband, confident, capable, and full of life. Every evening when the church bells echoed across the plains, she would sit on the porch, watching the children play beneath the old oak tree. Their laughter rang pure as the spring wind, and sometimes she still couldn't believe this was her life. One afternoon, a strange carriage stopped at the farm gate. The driver stepped out, carrying a letter. The handwriting was so familiar it made her heart tighten. Her parents, In the letter, they wrote that they had heard about her prosperous life and that they wished to reconnect and restore family ties. Evelyn stood still for a long moment. The evening wind swept through the fields, whispering across the wheat. When Daniel came up beside her, he simply asked, "Do you want me to reply for you?" She shook her head and smiled gently. "No, I'll answer myself." Evelyn wrote a reply, each word calm, tender, yet resolute. "Dear Mother and Father, for years, I wished I could be loved the way others were. But now I understand. Family isn't where we are born. It's where we are respected and understood. I have found that place, and I hope you too will find yours. I wish you peace." She signed her name, folded the letter, and sealed it. And when she handed it to the messenger, she felt lighter. No bitterness, no revenge, just release. That evening, Evelyn sat beneath the old oak tree where the children still ran and played. Daniel saw her from afar, walked over and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You all right?" "Yes," she smiled softly. "I am. I think I've finally come home." She lifted her gaze to the sky, a brilliant blue brushed with drifting white clouds. Everything around her seemed to embrace her gently, the way love does when it's real. Once she was sold like a debt, but in the end, she became the most precious gift life could ever give. Evelyn had found more than love. She had found dignity, peace, and the strength to forgive. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't return to prove anyone wrong. She simply chose to live better, and that, in itself, was her most significant victory. Family isn't where we are born. It's where we are loved the right way. No one is a burden once they find the place where their heart is truly seen. Evelyn was once called a burden, but through kindness and resilience, she became the most precious gift in someone's life. Perhaps, in our own ways, we've all been Evelyn, judged, hurt, yearning to be seen and loved. And one day we realize, happiness doesn't come from where we were born, but from where we are understood. Thank you for listening to today's story. If you believe kindness can change a life, please share this story so its light can touch one more heart. This is Deep Life Tales, where every story reminds us that kindness is still the most beautiful thing in this world. And